Hey there, everyone. Welcome to Broadband Deployment News. So it's been almost 3 years now since the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act passed. That is the act that includes the BEAD program, and we have yet to see any last mile broadband deployments from that program. And with it being about 90 days now from the election, we're going to see more and more. I think that is going to be a political talking point for the Republicans. So I was going to mention that and talk about that a little bit today and look at this article in Politico. Be right back. Hey, Rick Uzzi again with Broadband Deployment News. So I want to take a look at this article in Politico. I mentioned this back right before the debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. I said, I bet we see this come up because I expected that Joe Biden might tout his infrastructure investments, and I expected that if Donald Trump was prepared to answer that, which he is quite often not prepared with an answer other than maybe what he said in his rallies, but that he would then maybe counter with the fact that no dollars or no broadband's been built from that program yet. But, of course, I didn't expect Joe Biden to do very well, but I was not anticipating the disaster that it was. And now here we are with a completely different candidate, 90 days out from the election. And I wanted to, again, talk through this article because this is something that we are seeing. It is something that's being brought up. This is similar to, comments about almost $8 billion that was put forward to create electric charging nations around the country. And apparently we've built 8 of those. I don't know if it's a similar situation where there's a lot of red tape and other kinds of environmental or who knows what that people are going through, but you would think you'd have more than 8 charging stations at this point. So, there are good reasons that this would take longer than, let's say, 6 months or a year. But there are some things that were in this bill that were, in my opinion, extraneous, not related to deploying broadband, democratic things that they wanted to put in here, that are not necessarily related to broadband. So I think that is part of the issue. And of course, the fact that here we are very close to an election is not good for the administration. I'm sure they were hoping to, I think as the article says here, maybe take some winning laps here at this point and be able to tout what's been built at this point, but that's not the case so far. So you see here, people need to see it, how politics hung up the $42 billion internet build out. The 2021 infrastructure law contained tens of billions of dollars intended to help rural parts of the country like Southwest Virginia, but mounting political snags will mean the administration will have virtually nothing to show for it by Election Day. President Joe Biden's 2021 infrastructure law promised to help Virginia expand broadband internet to hard-to-reach corners of the Commonwealth, investing nearly $1.5 billion to improve a key service across the swing state, crucial to Democrats' hopes to the November election. So this money was split out by how many unserved locations and underserved locations each state had. I think underserved was included in there as well. And then that compared to the total across the United States and all the territories, and that's how much each state got. So far, Virginia, like many states, hasn't seen a cent of that money put to use. The state got news only in July that it was approved for funding, more than 10 months after completing its application to Washington, and nearly 3 years after the law was signed. Virginia's story is just one thread of the messy, delayed rollout of a $42 billion national program championed by Democrats in particular, but with big potential payoffs in Republican districts as well. And yeah, the Republicans certainly were fighting this as a lot of spending, and $42.5 billion is a lot of money. And this was, if you combine this with the Inflation and Reduction Act, which had nothing to do with inflation, $1 trillion, I think it's costing right now about $1 trillion for that act, and it's got nothing to do with reducing inflation. It actually increased inflation because of the spending. Democrats don't call it inflation reducing. They call it the Green New Deal. So, that was combined with the spending. So a lot of money was being spent all at once. There was ARPA, coronavirus kinds of things that were being, coronavirus, to help us recover from that. Lots of money being spent, which did, I think, stimulate the inflation that we've seen now for several years. So this was part of it. This was the spending. So yeah, Republicans, a lot of Republicans were fighting this. They call it the bipartisan infrastructure law, but there were far fewer Republicans that signed on for it. But They will be very happy when they get the money, and will be very happy to be able to provide broadband to their citizens. So they certainly like that part of the bill. In his speech last month at the Democratic National Convention, Biden trumpeted his broadband program in historic terms, calling it a national build-out, not unlike what Roosevelt did with electricity. Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris helped create and promote the program as vice president, and on the campaign trail, it could offer a way to show how the White House has delivered for rural Americans. Now, again, if she brings this up in the debate and Trump is prepared by his people, then he will counter with the fact that this is $42 billion that hasn't done anything yet. That's not true, obviously, because there's a lot been taking place prior to this to try to get us to a point where we're going to be getting broadband deployed in the next year or so. But it has taken longer than it should have, I think. But Harris makes her case. As Harris makes her case, the delays have turned what could have been a victory lap for the Biden-Harris administration into a focal point for industry frustration, local partisan finger-pointing, and anti-Washington complaints from all corners. The success or failure of the program could have political implications in Virginia, a swing state that voted Democratic in the last 4 presidential elections, but is a current target for the Republican National Committee. Polling has shown a narrow lead shifting between Republicans and Democrats, all within the margin of error. This is a really tight election. It's going to be tight in Virginia. It's going to be tight here where I am in Georgia. Lots of swing states, very close. So it's going to be very interesting. One liberal activist lamented a missed campaigning opportunity from the broadband money. People need to see it, said Lindley Thorne, a political director for Democratic campaign group Rural Ground Game, which helps lead campaigns for Virginia state seats. It's got to be a lot more concrete. We're past the point of being able to earn people's votes based on the status quo or just hope. And yeah, if you've been talking about this for 3 years, people are starting to wonder when's it going to happen? I know I hear that from people that'll comment on here sometimes. It's like, I've been waiting all this time. I haven't seen it. The program known officially as BEAD and embedded in Biden's mammoth infrastructure law was meant to bring a vital service to communities across America. But thanks to a federal affordability requirement that telecommunications companies say is too tight, many states have sparred with Washington over their funding applications, delaying the rollout. There's a little chance that communities across the country will see concrete results until 2025 at the soonest, well past Biden's time in office, and no chance at all before November's election. Mentions here 16 states are still waiting for their BEAD funding approval. You can see those in my state, Georgia, looks like it's waiting on that as well. You can see those that have gotten their approval. Politically, frustration has already boiled into attacks. Some Republican members of the state's congressional delegation blamed the Biden administration during oversight hearings this spring and summer. General Assembly Delegate Terry Kilgore, veteran Republican legislator, said it counts as an embarrassment for politicians trying to defend the program. He said his constituents in the state's rural Southwest are eager to improve their spotty internet access, and they've been hoping for money since the law was signed. It's hard to address in a town hall or a tele-town hall when those questions come up, Kilgore told Politico. You say, well, we're still waiting on the federal government. And they go, oh, gosh, it's been 3-4 years. It sort of puts egg on everybody's face. The administration says Biden's broader goals are on schedule despite delays in states like Virginia. The government is executing BEAD on the 10-year timeline Congress intended, a spokesperson for the NTIA said when asked by Politico. The federal grant program has now greenlighted applications from 34 states, which will let them start accessing the first share of federal aid. But given the lengthy negotiations over the terms of their plans, the administration doesn't expect broadband projects funded by the marquee program to launch in earnest until 2025. And that's true because it's going to take time. Now that some states have had their plans approved, they've opened up their grant portal so that internet service providers can come in and determine what areas they want to bid on, but you've got that back and forth. So some states are still doing challenge processes. Some are now in the process of accepting applications. And those are the ones that will be getting money out sooner, like Louisiana, that's been kind of ahead of the pack here. But, there's still a long way to go. And, once you then award the money, then you've got to get it built. So it is going to be 2025 for some states and later for others, I believe, is what we're looking at. As the months go by, there's also another clock ticking loudly on the program's broader policy goals. If voters return former President Donald Trump to office in November, Republicans will have wide latitude to rewrite its rules, possibly wiping out Democratic requirements for accessibility, union participation, and climate impact. and almost certainly dialing back the affordability rules that have caused so much friction in Virginia. And that's probably true. And some of those things are the things that are making this kind of onerous for internet service providers who are thinking about doing this. There's lots of rules about who they're going to hire, who they can hire, having to do environmental studies and lots of things in there that are really secondary to the goal, and in some cases just completely not related to the goal of trying to get broadband, affordable broadband to people as quickly as possible. Even among the numerous delayed state broadband programs, Virginia stands out as a special case. The state has marketed itself as a hub of digital infrastructure. It hosts Amazon's second headquarters and a huge portion of the world's data centers. When lawmakers passed BEAD in 2021, Virginia already had a standing broadband office, a rarity at the time. That gave Virginia an advantage, as did its broadband-savvy unit senator, Democrat Mark Warner, a former telecom executive who successfully fought to maximize his state's payout from the program. When the time came, I'm not sure how he did that because it was based on a formula, but anyway, it says he maximized the state's payout. When the time came, it was the first in the nation to complete its application for the federal broadband money last September, a milestone proudly touted by Republican Governor Glenn Youngkin. Months passed. Louisiana was the first state to get approval for the money in December 2023. Then came Kansas, Nevada, West Virginia in April, then more than a dozen others in the spring and summer. Youngkin's office told Politico this summer that he was concerned about the delay, saying he worried that other states might hire Virginia's workers if they got the money first. And that's a valid concern for any state because there's going to be competition for people, because if a lot of states get money at the same time, then you're going to be having people that are contractors, whatever, maybe moving from place to place because it's going to take some time to get all of this infrastructure built in a particular state. And you might lose workers if your state's not ready that would go to another state. So I understand his concerns there. It shows the amount per state here. So, as an example, you got Alaska, 1 billion. My state of Georgia's higher at 1.3. Virginia mentioned 1.5. So they got a good amount of money in Virginia. Texas was the most, 3.3 billion. So they got the most money. California got quite a bit at 1.98, almost 2 billion. Florida has a good amount at 1.2. So, and then you see some of the states that have a lot less population. You got North Dakota, 130 million, South Dakota, 207 million. You got your small states like New Hampshire that have a lot of people, more people concentrated, fewer people and more people concentrated together. So, just under 200 million for them. Rhode Island, 108 million. So big difference, obviously, between something like Rhode Island, a small state with fewer rural areas than something like Texas. Interviews and written documents show the issue holding Virginia back appeared to be the law's affordability requirement. According to funding rules published in May 2022 by the Commerce Department, any provider taking the federal money needs to offer a low-cost service option. The administration in Virginia were locked in a multi-month standoff over exactly how to fulfill that requirement, an impasse that hit many other states as well. And that is a concern. Again, that's something that Republicans are going to fight back on because they believe that the market should drive prices. It should be based on supply and demand. There is, of course, a difference in what the costs are as well for a broadband operator. So if you've got a broadband operator whose service area is in a suburban or urban area where you've got lots of potential subscribers clustered around in fairly dense areas of folks, then it's a lot less costly and you have a much better chance of return. So your cost per mile is less and you have more customers per mile, so you can recover that more quickly. So it's very different than if you're in farmland where you've got many, many miles per customer, or if you're in Alaska where you might have clusters of people, but then you've got these huge areas that require middle mile broadband networks and longer middle mile broadband networks, those kinds of things. So it's going to vary from state to state. So, I think the NTI was trying to be reasonable when they said, it's up to the states to determine what that low cost option is. But from state to state, it's going to be different as well. Here in Georgia, there are areas where I live where I've got multiple operators already. Now, my particular area is not, does not qualify for BEAD, but there are some areas that are going to be rural, but easier to serve than other areas where you've got, again, maybe farms, and it's going to be harder and more expensive. So to try to force operators to come up to provide a price is something that is going to be, I think from the Republican standpoint, it's going to be a problem. And again, that might be something that the Trump administration could reverse or tweak if they get in on this. The affordability rule was part of a suite of federal conditions, some written into the original infrastructure law and some added by the administration in its 2022 guidelines. The rules require states accepting the money to make sure providers plan for climate change, reach out to unionized workforces, and hire locally. One vague but broad provision requires low-cost options and fast connections for middle-class families at reasonable prices. It is vague because, again, the cost of providing the service is going to vary from place to place. Some top Republicans, including Trump's vice presidential nominee, Senator J.D. Vance, complained early last year that these requirements were unnecessary progressive goals that went beyond the infrastructure law. Yeah. Democrats defended them as reasonable considerations. If the federal government was going to pay companies to build out internet service, the law should do everything possible to make sure that it was rolled out responsibly in a way that consumers can actually afford. And something that they've done that has, made this take longer, I agree with, which is making sure, or at least trying to make sure, that the money that we spend is put to good use and is put to efficient use, that we're not building broadband in areas that already have it. So, part of the delay was we had no good map when this all came out. We had the only broadband map we had from the FCC was based on census blocks. So if a provider said that they provide service to any home in a census block, then that census block was considered served. When it could be that they had 2 or 3 homes that were getting service and another 45 that were not, that didn't have access. So that was obviously not acceptable as far as us determining which locations should get funding or how many locations per state should get funding. So they took the time to say we need to make a better map. That was part of the act, that we needed to have a better map down to the location. The FCC worked on that. There was a lawsuit between one company, I can't remember who it was, that wanted to get the contract that CostQuest wound up getting, where they would produce the fabric that underlies the map that identified all of the broadband serviceable locations. And that lawsuit had things drag out, so that was part of the delay. But again, part of this is trying to make sure that we're spending the money in a wise way, and I'm all for that. I'm just not for all the other extraneous, progressive kind of goals that they shoehorn in there that really are not important as far as broadband goes. And as far as the low-cost option, again, that needs to be looked at in a different way than trying to force that in some fashion, because you want it to be affordable, but you can look at that other ways. You have to really look at what the cost is of the service that you're putting in. I did something, I think it was yesterday, about Starlink. Starlink now can apply or they could be considered for areas that are very extremely high-cost locations where fiber is going to be way too expensive and maybe as far as deploying. And then Starlink could come in and serve that area. Now, Starlink's expensive. It's $120 per month. But if somebody makes a choice to live in that area, that is one of the things they have to consider. And this money, the BEAD money, could be used to maybe bring those prices down because you don't have to pay to launch a satellite, but you could maybe apply that money to reducing the cost on that. So again, it's going to be different based on the area. In Virginia, the issue is how explicitly the state would spell out what a provider's low-cost option would be. Nudged by telecom companies, the Commonwealth initially sought to let providers themselves determine these rates. The Biden administration pushed for a more precise price formula set by the state rather than the companies. Ultimately, the NTIA and Virginia compromised and allowed the Commonwealth to set a range of rates, $30 to $75 per month or lower if they want, that providers had to offer within eligible areas. And, $30, what are they talking about here? $30, is that for, 100 meg symmetrical and 75 is for a gig? Or are they saying that, these would both be for gig broadband, $30? That's way below what would be charged in a market like mine. So I'm not sure exactly what they're talking about there. The argument hung up Virginia's $1.5 billion application. And by early 2024, its delay was reverberating across Capitol Hill, where many Republican lawmakers invoked the dispute in Virginia to complain about the progress with BEAD nationwide. And of course, Virginia being right there where probably a lot of these lawmakers live, it's going to be focused on, right? Whose fault was the delay? That depends on who you ask. Republicans have generally blamed overweening Washington bureaucrats. But industry critics say the Virginia government was too sympathetic with the telecom industry from the start. The initial Virginia plan on affordability was mimicking the talking points from the telecom industry, argued Christopher Ali, a Penn State professor who's researched broadband extensively, including Virginia, in a recent interview. Like many states, Virginia faced pressure from the telecom industry over too close control of rates and wanted to be sure companies were actually willing to participate. And that is a question. As you get more regulations and as you have more hurdles on these grants, sometimes any company that's going to get any kind of grant for anything has to look at that and go, it's just not worth it. It's not worth it. No company wants to go into business. They don't care if you're going to pay them to build out the infrastructure, but if it's going to cost them more to operate the business, or it's just not going to really be a worthwhile profit, they're not going to do it. So that's something that you have to consider as you're doing this. And I think that's what they're saying there. The compromise version was still fairly telecom friendly. It's pretty close to what we were advocating for. Ray Lamora, president of a stable cable broadband association called State Cable Broadband Association called VCTA, told Politico. Lamora said that forcing ultra-low rates would have made the build-out untenable for many companies. That's true. I mean, if you're going to again, no company's going to go into business if they're going to lose money or not make any money, unless they're a not-for-profit. And, that's one reason the Biden administration, in their notice of funding opportunity, I think in the act itself said, they really would like not-for-profits to be doing this. That would be a municipality or a co-op, like an electric membership co-op. Maybe some public-private partnerships between them that are not so much profit-driven, because then you don't have the profit. But you still have to cover your costs, and you still have to have, even though it's not a profit, you have to have money on top of your cost to be able to roll back into the business so that you can maintain it, right? You can't just, you've got to continue to maybe grow. You've got to continue to be able to maintain equipment that's failing. So you've got to put all of that in there. And the profit is just not that big a factor in the cost most of the time. Now, of course, if you have no competition and you've got a company that wants to, charge way more than it's costing them, that's one thing. If you've got companies that are going to operate reasonably, especially if they're going to be getting funding, and you're going to allow them to have a reasonable profit, that's different. But no company's going to want to operate if it's going to be a loss to them. Lamora said that many unserved households are far off the roads, he pointed out, making them the hardest to reach with broadband infrastructure. That's that long driveway problem where once you get that built, it's not that big of a deal. If you've got houses that are, again, the customers themselves aren't that far away, but they're way off the road, then you have that one-time cost of, trenching or whatever you have to do to get that long driveway taken care of. It's more about the areas that are really hard to reach, maybe up on a mountain with very few people, or, you've got to get over a river, those kinds of things. Got to get through granite or somehow get fiber in areas that are difficult that way. So those are the things that are going to make the cost go up. And then especially the number of subscribers that you've got in a particular area compared, to other areas. Virginia's standoff has parallels across the country that have taken their own time to resolve. Initially, the Commerce Department anticipated approving all states' plans by the spring of 2024. It has since updated that to by the fall. In a budget hearing in late June, Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo told a House panel that states were to blame for waging unnecessary arguments over the federal rules. We are not slowing this down, Raimondo said. A lot of these governors are dragging their feet. I don't think they're dragging their feet. They really want to get this money. They really want to be able to get broadband to their subscribers, but they are looking at the reality of things on the ground. And each state knows it's one of the reasons. And again, one of the things that I think was smart about this was looking at this on a state-by-state basis, not letting the federal government decide how to do all of this, but delegating a lot of that to the states because they know the lay of the land. They know who their local operators are. They know what their communities are like. They know what the topography is like. They're much closer to that. So that makes sense. But you've got to understand that they've got their concerns and you got to listen to that. Regardless of where the blame lies, the program's inertia draws a contrast to some of Biden's other spending programs, which have long since broken ground on highway repairs and other infrastructure projects. In Virginia, that leaves thousands of mostly rural residents stuck in a long, outdated version of the internet. According to the official state count, there are more than 100,000 homes and offices across Virginia with connection speeds low enough to qualify for the $1.48 billion funding Not sure if that's 25 by 3 or less than 100 by 20. Without an upgrade, residents there have dial-up level connection speeds or are forced to shell out more than $100 a month for satellite service. There's probably not too many that have dial-up connection speeds. I'm assuming there's some people that have DSL or other, fixed wireless, but it's maybe, 10 megabits per second down. I doubt it's 56K at best. So I doubt it's dial-up speeds. There might be a few, somebody on top of a mountain, maybe that's all I can get is dial-up or satellite. And satellite's not bad. Satellites, you can get over 100 megabits per second on the download. You can get 10 or more on the upload a lot of times. It's just expensive. Like I said, it's $120 a month, and it's $300 for the base station, for the terminal. So Katrina Smith, a former president of the Virginia Realtors Association, has seen the impact both on her family and professionally. She said her daughter could not stay with her in Winchester in the Shenandoah Valley during the pandemic because her job in a credit union needed a wired connection. Ultimately, Smith said she and her neighbors petitioned Comcast to extend its network to her home, which the company agreed to do for a price. We paid a lot of money, she said. And again, that's what you see. That's what you were seeing is these incumbents like the large major MSOs would say, yeah, we can provide the service for you, but you've got to, you're way off the road. We're going to have to extend our network to reach you. And that's going to cost $10,000 or in some cases $30,000. I don't know what it cost this person, but it could be a lot of money with the kind of quote you get. And that is, you're not going to see that, with the BEAD program. And I think even now, if an operator were to quote that, a Comcast or somebody, it would not be taken well. I know Comcast wants to probably try to get in on some of the BEAD dollars. So if news came out that they were quoting those kinds of prices now, I don't think that would be a good thing. For people who can't afford to do that, there are costs beyond just access, she said. Home prices go up in areas where there's good connectivity. Virginia Realtors determined in their research done in recent years, an association analysis in 2020 showed that better internet access and connectivity strapped southwestern Virginia could increase typical home value by 13%. Yeah, how many of you would want to move to a place? I mean, unless you're like really, I want to live in the mountains, and then it's a trade-off. And you're like, well, I really want to live in the mountains. I can deal with using satellite internet, especially now as good as it is with Starlink. But, if internet's important to you and affordable, more affordable, let's say, than Starlink, how many of you would move if you didn't have good internet? So yeah, that's true. The Biden administration maintains there's a big payoff around the corner. Virginia can now move from planning to action. Alan Davidson, who heads the NTIA, told reporters on July 26, following the approval of the Commonwealth's plans, which he lauded as sophisticated. Now able to obtain an initial chunk of the grant money, Virginia can soon start picking the providers to do the network building. Although it faces yet another bureaucratic hurdle before that can happen, it's still trying to get federal certification for exactly what areas are eligible for this aid. I think they're talking about the challenge process there. So again, once states are told, I think they would have had to. Yeah, maybe they're doing the challenge process now. That's where they have to go through. They have to look at the federal broadband map. They have to look at their own maps and what they know, and basically prove that they know where. And they have to open that up to the public and say, okay, here's what we see as the areas that require broadband service, and then there's a challenge process there where people can say, yes, that's true, no, that's not, and go through that process. So Louisiana announced last month that it's moving to pick broadband providers this fall, hoping to launch projects in the first quarter of 2025. And again, they've been kind of ahead of the curve before everybody on this. So if they get started first quarter of 2025, then you will start to see some of this broadband being completed before the end of 2025. With BEAD money on hold nationwide, Republicans have been sharpening their knives for a different future for the program, one where telecom companies get the money without the Biden administration's safeguards. What do they mean by safeguards there? Maybe it mentions it in here. But again, climate change should not be in this bill. Telecom companies should have also the ability to hire who they want to hire. Frankly, if they have to, it's going to be hard enough to find people to do this work. But if you're constrained on who you can hire, it's going to make it even worse. So I'm not sure what they mean by safeguards there. If Trump is elected in November, then his agency leaders would have wide latitude to revisit the rules that Republicans don't like or make other changes to the program, although they could face hurdles in relitigating approved state plans and would still have to comply with the infrastructure law's directives. Both in Congress and at agencies, influential Republicans have signaled they don't expect to see the same affordability demands. They might have a friend in Elon Musk, too, who has offered his own swipes at the outrageous waste of BEAD. Musk's Starlink service offers satellite internet to rural Americans, and his SpaceX officials have expressed interest in receiving some of these broadband subsidies in certain areas. As I mentioned, the NTIA has come out and issued guidance on how states could include Starlink in their BEAD program for these extremely high cost per location areas. So they had met with Starlink, and they've now come out with that guidance. So that is being done. It's interesting. I forget, there was something that I heard it, and I can't remember what it was said, specifically what he said, but Elon Musk was talking about how he could cover the entire United States and pay for the broadband service for everybody using Starlink based on what we're paying for the service or paying for the BEAD program. So House Republicans have already launched an investigation into whether the Biden administration's affordability requirements were violating the infrastructure law itself, which includes a prohibition on state regulation. And it does. That's something that the Republicans, I think, that agreed to sign on to it required, was that you had to say that you could not do any kind of rate regulation in here. In a May hearing, Representative John Joyce of Philadelphia, a Republican from Philadelphia, called it incredibly troubling that the NTIA would withhold grant approval based on affordability requirements. Brendan Carr, an influential Republican commissioner at the FCC and potential agency chair under Trump, said during a July hearing that BEAD needs a course correction, complaining that it failed to connect any households to broadband after years because of requirements that led it to go off the rails. In an interview this May, Representative Bob Latta, Republican in Ohio, who chairs a key House Energy and Commerce Telecom subcommittee, predicted a Trump re-election would mean a change in broadband priorities. We might not even ask those questions about rate regulation, he said, because it wouldn't be going on. Industry leaders are clamoring for this added flexibility. In July, more than 30 telecom executives signed a letter to Raimondo saying that aggressive implementation of the affordability requirements could undermine the program. We and our members sincerely want this program to work, but we believe that your agency's administration of the low-cost service option requirement in particular risks putting the overall success of BEAD in jeopardy, the letter said. So internet service providers loved the Affordable Connectivity Program because it was a subsidy that got them more customers. So they had certain people in an area that couldn't afford broadband, or more likely could afford it but didn't really care and didn't want it, or were getting it and they got the lowest cost plan. It's like, oh, now that we get the subsidy, we can actually buy, instead of getting the 100 meg symmetrical, we can get a gig, and we'll just take that $30 and put it towards that. So internet service providers loved it, right? The public loved it because it was free money. Internet service providers loved it because it was free money for them. They could provide service. So they like that affordability option. But what they don't like is having to put a price out there that will not cover their costs or seriously reduces their profit to where it's not worthwhile doing. So that's the issue there. Some of these broadband officials see the Virginia Compromise, which was approved after their letter, as more palatable and one that could be adopted more widely. ACA Connects, it used to be the American Cable Association, they now call it ACA Connects, said it was encouraged to see Virginia's final low-cost proposal, which gives providers flexibility and reflects marketplace realities. A spokesperson for that cable group told Politico in August. One state broadband leader who successfully won approval from the Biden administration last month with a more flexible low-cost plan, not to exceed $70 per month, recalculated annually, says she would welcome ditching more prescriptive affordability requirements in the event of a new White House leadership. It's my job to be telling companies what they should charge or what they charge? I would say it's not. Misty Ann Giles, Republican who heads Montana's broadband efforts and directs its Department of Administration, said in an interview. She told Politico that NTIA is unduly pushing a social policy. While Republicans paint the program as a regulatory mess, Democrats looking for political capital have tried to showcase smaller efforts to boost connectivity. That includes internet projects in Virginia and elsewhere, already underway, funded from other pots of money in the infrastructure law and pandemic relief packages. So they may be talking about middle mile program there, because money for that, I believe, has already been released in places. And of course, ARPA, USDA, ARPA would be and the coronavirus kind of law, that would be the pandemic relief packages. These pots of money have meant more than $700 million flowing to Virginia across 30 different broadband projects, still in process, but already making progress, according to the administration. That's on top of other efforts in recent years funded by the Commonwealth itself. Across the nation, beyond BEAD, we have billions of dollars already in flight. We're already connecting people, an NTIA spokesperson told Politico. And yeah, that's true. A lot of ARPA money has been put to use. Believe it or not, some RDOF money, CAF2 money has been put to use. USDA Reconnect, a lot of that money is being put to use. And the more of that money that's being put to use now, then that's taking areas off of the map for BEAD. So that means that BEAD money is going to go further. Local Virginia politicians speak with pride of how far they've already come, even as they say BEAD will be vital for finishing the job and acknowledging impatience among their communities. When I'm talking to voters, I talk about how with the local and private funds, we've leveraged over $2 billion to invest in broadband infrastructure and hitting almost the entire Commonwealth, said Senator Jennifer Boysko, the Democrat who chairs the Commonwealth's Broadband Advisory Council, told Politico. However, she acknowledged delays can cause tension. I've done some meetings with local county leaders who are frustrated because they know they've invested the money, they know it's there, but the projects aren't happening as fast as they want them to, she said. In May, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen visited Stafford County, Virginia to trumpet hundreds of $millions in broadband investments from her department's pandemic relief money. She said more than 600 new addresses had broadband thanks to these efforts. The Treasury Department says its programs have now connected more than 70,000 throughout the Commonwealth. Despite the claims of change, the effects still aren't always felt in rural corners of Virginia. The 600 households mentioned by Yellen represents less than 1% of the total homes without fast connections. Thorne, the Democratic political campaigner, fumed as she recalled unserved residents who know internet infrastructure is within reach. We put up these ridiculous barriers to just actually getting it to people, she said. There's not the shovels in the ground, she added. That's what people need to see. So, long article, but very good, I thought, as far as covering, the issue. And again, it is at this point, as I mentioned, it's kind of a political thing. We're in the silly season. So as we get closer to the election, the debate is coming up very soon. Again, I would not be surprised if it's mentioned. Although if it is, I think it would start most likely from Kamala Harris mentioning it. And then again, it would depend on whether Trump is prepared to counter that as to whether he mentions something on the other side as to nothing yet being built. But it certainly is at lower levels of the political sphere. It's being mentioned and brought up. I've heard about it in a few different places. And this article, I think, covers it pretty well. Thanks for joining today. I appreciate it. If you found this interesting or helpful, if you'd give me a like on the video, I would appreciate that. And if you're not subscribed to our channel, click the subscribe button, ring the bell, and you'll be notified when I'm live. It may be wrong already if you look at it, but go ahead and do that. And again, thanks for joining me today, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.